Welcome back. If you're just jumping into the segment where we just take a look at some of the top stories making headlines within the local daily. So I hope you grabbed your standard this morning and you'll get details of some of the stories that we want to take you through this morning. Of course, with me is Dr. Sam Kamau. He's a lecturer at the University of Aga Khan, plus a political analyst, and Sandra Ochola, who is a political analyst. Thank you guys so much for making time this morning.
Thank you.
All right, so the big story that we're running with this morning on the standard, as you can see, is why Kenya is headed for a third referendum. Dr. Sam, let me get your thoughts on this whole issue. It first of all started with a handshake at the steps of Harambee. Now we are looking at a possible referendum, which is becoming quite popular among other politicians.
Well, I would say the headline, it's almost definitive that we are headed for a referendum, which I don't think is the case. There is a clamor. Maybe it would be why Kenya might be headed for a third referendum. I know there are a couple of issues emanating from the handshake, and I think from what I have seen in terms of the details about the handshake, which was primarily about addressing, first it was calming the tensions that we had last year. The other thing was addressing some things that have been there when you talk about exclusion, when you talk about, healing and bringing the country together. Right. But I don't think those things necessarily warranted, a referendum. But what I've been seeing, especially with one party is interpreting, saying that to actually address some of the things that were captured in the handshake, that it would require a referendum, which in my opinion would not necessarily be the issue, because time and time again, we know the things that have been ailing Kenya. We thought with the new constitution in 2010, that was the way to address some of these issues. But we have seen actually maybe the problem is in the software of the country in terms of how we think and how we look at things. For example, our electioneering process. Every now and then we keep changing the law, we keep changing the processes to think that we can actually fix. But the problem is actually the people. It is not necessarily the law. So in a sense, I know there is the building clamor for a referendum, which in a sense, Kenya having come out of a very protracted political and electioneering process. A referendum actually is another election that would put up in the same campaign mode, and then all of a sudden, which will take a process of about 2 years, gathering signatures, going through the political negotiations and all that. I think it may be unwelcome at this particular time, even if there are really issues that we need to address. Perhaps there are other ways. Yeah.
All right, Sandra, your thoughts on this?
I'm glad that you said that it's something that's more popular with politicians as opposed to it being more popular with citizens. Because if you asked an ordinary Kenyan on the streets today, they'll tell you that we're exhausted. We've just come from two very acrimonious...
it was a long 2017.
Yes, a very long 2017. The economy is just picking up. As a people, we'd like to move on and ensure that you're focusing on other matters, and particularly on how to put food on our table. But you see, for politicians, this is what they do on a daily basis. This is their job, politicking, and they can do that from year in, year out to the detriment of citizens. So fine. They could say that they want a referendum, but I think it's the citizens who are going to decide that at the end of the day. And even so, then citizens must be aware that when this offer will be made to them at whatever time, then they risk watering down that constitution that they all passed unanimously in 2010, because it opens up an avenue where other issues could be brought in, issues of religion, issues of health, issues of devolution. Right. And so we must, if we are to embrace them, then it must be with a lot of caution.
All right, this is on page 6. That main specific story that we're discussing this morning is on page 6 of the Standard. Let me just give you a glimpse of what MPs think. Gatundu South Member of Parliament Moses Kuria said that he supports calls for the referendum, only that he wanted it to be held in August 2022 alongside the general election. Dr. Sam, oh my goodness, a referendum as well as another general. Will that even be possible? Do you even have confidence that IEBC will be able to pull off that, given the in-house wrangles that we're already seeing?
And I think that is the other issue. We first need to fix issues around IEBC, because we can't say that there is a properly constituted body that can handle the, organize the referendum. But actually, for me, the other issue that I have is the fact that when you talk about this referendum, you're talking about perhaps expanding the structure of the executive. Those are some of the things we are talking about. Like I said earlier, in terms of building inclusion in this country, in terms of building cohesion, in terms of bringing the people together, in terms of calming tensions, I am saying it's not a constitutional issue. And there's a sense in which is a practice world over, like in the US, whenever there is an important constitutional issue, they actually tend to put it as a referendum question during the, main election.
Right.
So this is not far-fetched actually saying this. But like I am saying, it could be just a way, you know, the referendum clamor could be just a way of heightening political tensions and conversations, so that we are constantly talking about that. But you have to remember, for example, and one of the good things that has come out of the handshake is that now everybody is talking about the big four. Now, when you think about the big four, these are things that would directly go towards helping Mwananchi. And in my opinion, they actually don't require a referendum. It is what we have seen now. For example, ODM, they have come out and said we are supporting the big four. During the State of the Nation address, again, the issue of big four, you know, came together. If we could focus on these things that have everything to do with Wanjiku, because expanding the structure of the executive, that has to do with, you know, politicians and creating positions for the politician. I think what Wanjiku is crying for is services, things that will directly help. When you talk about universal healthcare, there are very many people. Even right now, when you talk about NHIF, it's only about 7 million people who have actually, you know, registered, and about 3.5 million who are active. We actually need more Kenyans to be covered under this. When you talk about food security, right now, because of the floods, many people need food relief. If these are the things we would be focusing on, I think it is a much more important conversation. And yet, we all agreed during the previous referendum is that there are a couple of issues we need to fix in the Constitution. So what we may need right now is actually an audit of that, so that we identify what are the really key issues that we may need to look at, and perhaps do it in 2022.
Sandra, what are your thoughts on that? And I would also love to hear your comment on whether, if Kenya was to go on a referendum, do you believe IEBC is, you know, credible or rather properly well constituted, rather to hold a referendum today? If Kenya's decided, okay, fine, let's go for a referendum today, do you have confidence that IEBC will deliver on that referendum, given the in-house wrangles that we're seeing within their body?
I do agree with some that the sentiments by the MP are not entirely far-fetched, and I think that's another issue that perhaps over time we'll need to focus on in terms of the benchmarks, so that again we are not politicking. You're not politicking every year, every month, so that we have a structure. Every 5 years we have elections, and is it possible at that particular time also to adopt best practice? And that is when now you are asking citizens to also engage in a referendum. So that kind of structure perhaps will also be helpful for us, or helpful to us, in terms of addressing some of these socio-political issues. But to answer your question on whether the IEBC is prepared, I think that is a discussion that has been had over and over again, and I think it's largely informed by the incidences that took place about a month or two ago, when 3 commissioners left the IEBC. And what everyone is, or rather the common narrative at this particular time, is that the IEBC has lost credibility in the face within the public sphere. And so even if it's going to conduct an initiative today, or whatever activity is going to conduct, then it might not have the confidence of Kenyans to undertake its activities. Then secondly, the other issue that everyone is focused on is on the leadership of Chebukati, so that even if he were to continue leading the IEBC, then the issues are going to be the same in terms of people having lost confidence in him as a person, and how it is affecting the activities of the IEBC. And third, of course, now goes back to the administrative and operational structures within the IEBC, especially now that they have very few commissioners to undertake the activities.
All right, this is what the National Assembly leader of Majority, Aden Duale, said, that he contended that although Jubilee Party was not keen on amending the constitution, no one was interested in sabotaging the appointments of the new IEBC commissioners. So details on that specific story, which is our main headline, is on page 6 of the Standard this morning. But away from politics, Dr. Sam, I'd love to hear your thoughts on euthanasia. The reason why I ask that is because one of our top stories, again, quite interesting, on page 7, is all eyes are on this 104-year-old man who has decided to aid suicide, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's both an ethical and a moral issue. When you think about, you know, euthanasia, it's not a practice that has gained you know, popularity in our context, and yet there are instances, especially in the Western world, where this is a bit more established. If there are specific, you know, circumstances, for example, somebody is ailing, is a terminal, you know, illness, and then the only option now would be, you know, for such a thing. If you're asking for my personal opinion, opinion, from a moral and ethical point of view, I think it's still debatable, and it will be on a case-by-case basis. I'll be hesitant, actually, to support it. And yet there are compelling reasons for such a practice. But for me, I think I'll be very hesitant around that.
All right. And for you, Sandra, and actually, as you're preparing to answer that question, Goodall, who is a 104-year-old man, he is not sick. However, this article tells us that Goodall's inability to complete basic tasks by himself has contributed to his desire to die, since he feels that he has lost his dignity and self-respect. 104 years old, he feels like his time is up, despite that, he's not ill. What are your thoughts on it?
It's the same. I look at it from the same discussion we have in terms of cremation, whether it should be cremated or buried. It falls within the same spectrum, and I think it also attracts the same kind of controversy. But if that is what he chooses, and the legal structures within the place where he wants to to undertake that activity accepts that, then it is okay. But for us now,
Dr. Sam is...
But for us now, we have our discussions now will go back to the right to life, because those are some of the issues that people will look into. What our constitution, from a legal perspective, whether our constitution allows that, because as it is, we're already very sensitive on matters of life, matters abortion, matters whatnot.
I would say maybe from a Kenyan and an African point of view, where we are a religious society.
Right.
Long life is seen as a blessing, not necessarily as a bad thing.
Okay.
And like for me, in my case, I'm hoping maybe I could live to be around 90, where I can still control many of my bodily...
But when you can't control your bodily functions...
When I get there, it's still an opportunity for me to be around with my family and my loved ones a little bit longer. That's what I'm saying. Long life is actually a blessing.
Right.
Yes.
Perhaps it's
and
quality.
If God has given you, 104 years or 110 years, I think it's something to be celebrated, rather than looking for that exit. Nevertheless, the world is changing, but I think in our own African society, we look at long life, where we're told, honor your father and mother, so that you may live long, is actually a blessing.
Okay. Yeah. So let's move away from politics and euthanasia now. Did you see Safaricom's profit? All right, how you have helped Safaricom secure about 55 billion profits. Let's quickly break that down for you so you can get an idea. All right, 95.64 billion. That's the revenue from voices, which accounts for the giant share of the total revenue. M-Pesa stands at about 62 billion. Mobile data, 36.36 billion. That's the revenue from selling mobile data, being 24% growth from previous year. Dividends that will be shared, of course, the people who are going to have the largest is both the Kenyan government and Vodafone. But take a look at this, 44 billion Kenyan shillings. That's the amount shareholders will receive as dividends, with the National Treasury and Vodafone getting the highest share. I mean, it's just another year. Safaricom has made more profits. Dr. Sam.
You know, every time Safaricom makes profit, it provokes mixed feelings. Because it's our habits that are fueling this. Actually, it's saying it's actually how we are helping Safaricom make money. And it's a good thing, because it's a company, it's supposed to be profitable. Yeah. It's good for the shareholders.
It's good for the country as well.
You may say so, but it is at the expense of Wanjiku. In terms of our consumption habits, in terms of, for example, you've seen data now has significantly gone up because we become so reliant on this. On one side, of course, it's a very good thing, but in terms of also continually making these services affordable, and available to the ordinary person, I think that is, for me, is the key issue. The good thing is we have seen actually costs are still falling, in terms of calling costs, in terms of M-Pesa have a problem because the costs keep going high, and yet M-Pesa has become a way of life. But the other thing I may also want to say is that this happened in spite of or despite the boycott.
Yes.
The boycott, that was called, because it seems then not to have had such a significant impact in the overall conversation. For the shareholders, it's good if companies are thriving in our current harsh economy, especially considering that last year many companies struggled. Right. The other now issue, and this cannot be a moral question, in terms of are they, getting all this money at the expense of Wanjiku? Because I am the one willingly making these calls. I'm the one consuming data. They are providing a basic service, and in that sense, I think it is good for the shareholders and those who have invested.
Sandra, before I get your thoughts, you were talking about M-Pesa, and we've seen how much M-Pesa is reeling in, about 32 billion. Yeah. I can't always help but imagine of that student at JKUAT who came up with M-Pesa. I always wonder, I always think about it. But Sandra, let me hear your thoughts in
Yes,
on this.
if Bob Collymore is watching, you should know I'm a faithful Safaricom user.
You deserve a reward. You contributed with 55 billion.
Contributed to this 55 billion and najivunia kwa Mkenya. So it's a really good thing that despite the harsh economy, as some have said, and during that period when, everyone was saying, oh, we don't have, there's no money, money is not circulating, and yet this is proof that there are certain things that we can do. And I think Safaricom could be a best practice company in terms of how do you thrive within particular environments or during particular seasons. But then now for me brings up the other issue of taxes, so that now we are helping Safaricom and Safaricom is also helping us in terms of now with these profits, after paying off its people, how else is Safaricom contributing now to the national kitty? Yeah, and I think that's that's a whole new conversation in terms of how the country will be gathering revenue from its companies.
All right, so the statement in regards to Safaricom, the details of that are on page 8 and page 9 of the Standard Group this morning. This whole colorful page breaks it down for you. But more so, let me show you a few other interesting numbers, all right? So Safaricom makes about 1,778 per second, all right? So with that in mind, in a minute, they make about 106,674. That's the fee of some national schools here in Kenya. So in an hour, they make about 6.4 million Kenyan shillings. That's a 2-bedroom house in Nyali or Suyokimau. Within a day, they make at about 153 million Kenyan shillings. That's the cost of renovating President Uhuru Kenyatta's office in the past 2 years. So that's a day. At the end of the month, Safaricom reels in at about 4.6 billion. I had to check that again. Billion. And that's the money for poor counties through the Equalization Fund and budget, which, by the way, Michael Gitonga will be talking about later on in the day. And at the end of the year, 55 billion Kenyan shillings. I feel like Safaricom is the Apple here in South Africa, or rather in Kenya, rather. Dr. Sam, those numbers that you've had, because the 55 billion, that's the cost of the Greenfield terminal at JKIA as well as security budget.
Well, yeah, in fact, I'm struck. The good thing is we're actually talking about money made by a company instead of, when you talk about 55 billion, is corruption. It is money that has been wasted.
Yes.
But, I mean, this is something, it's commendable. And you have to remember, I think many of us, when during the initial public offer, we bought shares. And when they hit 2 shillings, we got discouraged and felt the need to discard them. But now when we start now seeing, the profitability of this company, I think it's a good thing, like I said a little bit earlier. Only that we actually may need to learn from Safaricom, why everybody else was issuing profit warning when other companies were declaring losses. For them, they are providing an important service to the people. They've understood the trends being driven by the power of innovation, because I think that is one thing they are good at. And, continually being driven by innovation so that they can navigate towards the future.
And despite Bob Collymor's absence since October for his medical treatment in London, and that hasn't affected it.
Is the power of an organization that has structures, the way she's saying best practices, so that his absence, which would have been a crisis for other organizations, we actually know other companies that if the CEO left, it would completely shake up, the organization. I think it means it's a very strong organization in terms of the structures that have been put in place, that it can withstand shocks of, calls for boycott, the absence of the CEO, and other challenges that they have gone through to actually remain robust through a very difficult environment.
Doctor, yes, Sandra.
Sorry, and I think it also shows how badly we are doing as a people as regards our economic advancement, so that we are shocked. We are this shocked by success.
Jealous, actually.
Jealous and shocked by just one company. And it reminds me in instances where when you have a public officer who's done something really nice, he's on the front pages and we are really celebrating, and yet that is exactly what is expected of a public officer to do good. So I'm seeing the same scenario here where we are shocked at success, and yet that is what we are supposed to be expecting. That should be the day-to-day result of our activities, of our management, of our outputs within public and even our private institutions. So I think we should have more of this. The more we have, the more we will normalize success and not make it a headline issue.
All right, I love that. So on page 11, still on the Standard, there's this interesting story where the court has declined to stop the Kenya Ports Authority from cancelling port tenders. This is about 106 companies. Let me just read for you the highlight. The High Court yesterday declined to reinstate over 106 contractors whose tenders were cancelled by the Kenya Ports Authority over alleged bid rigging and insider trading. We've just talked about how we should, Sandra, and I want you to pick it up from there because you talked about such things like success, fighting corruption. It should be something that is normalized, not something that once it's put on a headline, everyone is like shocked.
Yes.
So your thoughts on that?
Where the court declines to stop KPA from cancelling port tenders, I think this is a nexus between the economic structures and also the processes of the court. And I think from here, I haven't read the story yet, so I'll look forward and perhaps do more research on this to find out exactly why the court declined to award, or rather cancel the tenders.
Well, let me read for you an extract before I get Dr. Sam's thoughts. Take a look at this. On April 30th, the Kenya Ports Authority Procurement and Supplies Manager Tony wrote a letter cancelling the tender that ran into billions of shillings. Let me give you attention to something else that will probably help us get meat on this story. KPA claims that some of the firms rigged the tendering process for lucrative building works to position themselves for contracts worth billions of shillings set aside by parastatals. So I feel like what KPA was doing here is right. So there's in-house trading that is going on, tenderings of billions of Kenyans of shillings. We decided to move to court to block out about 106 companies, and the court then says no.
That is part of the story. There are other intrigues behind that, but I think what I was going to say, when you look at KPA, that is Kenya Ports Authority, you talk about Kenya Pipeline Company, and I can also bring in, for example, the CA Communications Authority. These are some of the very profitable parastatals that handle billions, and they always have billions actually lying in their accounts. That would tell you then they actually have the capacity to issue, many tenders. Now, what happens, and I think this has been part of the problem, is that, of course, there is intense, competition and lobbying inside, trading like you're talking about. And any attempts to clean up, this process. And I think this is part of what we are dealing with. And what people have come up with an interesting way of, interfering with, in this process, because, there are billions at stake.
Right.
And there was, I think, the late former Minister Kajwang. He actually said that in this country, when you see a tender or contract that goes beyond $1 billion, there's something fishy going on right there. So this intense competition that, of course, some people trying to influence management, there are some of the things, that are at stake here. But I would not easily believe, the story that KPA is saying, or this other side, because these are just people competing, at times even using, the management to fight each other. These are the things that keep going on. And I think the day we'll be able to clean, especially around these parastatals that handle billions, that is when we will actually be able to make progress.
And even that's just the procurement process, because I think it's a headache for most of the traders, so to speak, and even people seeking tenders within these public institutions. They say it's very bureaucratic, and secondly, there's a lot of corruption therein, so that you have to give something for you to get a particular tender, and there's a lot of give and take. So see, these stories are not new, and perhaps it's for me, it's good that it's moving to the courts as well, so that the courts can also give their input, and I look forward to reading the judgment or the order, so to speak.
All right.
I was going to throw in something around that. What has been happening significantly is when Sandra and I are competing for this particular tender, and I get it and she doesn't get it, she'll now look for other ways, at times run to the, public procurement, oversight authority, or rush to court to try. And this is part of what has been prolonging implementation of key projects. If you remember the laptops project, when we talk about SGR, there are people actually, and other big projects in government. At times it's actually misusing the courts. And what happens is that, and for me, I keep talking about Wanjiku, she keeps suffering because some basic projects that would help Wanjiku, they stall because of these, court battles, which are okay by the if some injustice and some unfairness is being exercised. But I think I would agree with Sandra in terms of cleaning up, that process, so that when the criteria is clear and, that actually the company or the organization giving the tender can demonstrate that we actually followed our criteria, it was a fair process, then people would not, keep us held in these unending, prolonged, court battles and, you know, back and forth, which in the long run ends up costing the country a lot of billions.
Right.
Yeah.
Very quickly, take a look at, there's a story that has caught my eye on the Daily Nation. Away from politics and into pop culture news, banned Kenyan film premieres at the Cannes Festival. The Kenyan director, Wanrui, and the actress Samantha, as well as Sheila, yesterday during a photo call for the film Rafiki at the 71st edition of the Cannes Film Festival. The film on lesbian love has been banned in Kenya. What are your thoughts about this? I mean, first of all, this is the first Kenyan film to go to Cannes Festival, despite the fact that Ezekiel Mutua was not a fan of the content. Sandra. What are your thoughts?
Well, tricky one, I could say, because the world is changing, but then I don't think there's a blanket for everyone on how on who should catch up with whom, and, you know, whether there's a blueprint for everyone. So you have certain countries who've gone ahead, and issues of homosexuality is not quite of an issue. For us, it's still an issue, and I think you've heard even the president stating that a good number of times, that for us it's still a non-issue. But what I liked about what he talked about at that particular point was that regardless, it's important that we still focus on human rights, so that even the conversations we are having, we are not treating others as less than. As less than other human beings. Their right to life is still respected, their right to health is still respected, and they have equal freedoms, even as we still grapple on these issues of whether we want to accept the lifestyle or not.
Dr. Sam?
I look at it at two levels. On one side, it's a great thing that a Kenyan movie, you know, a Kenyan film is making debut in such a prestigious, you know, festival and, you know, platform. It's good for Kenya, it's good for the Kenya filmmaking industry. Yeah. The second level, which now I am looking at, is now the controversy surrounding how the film ended up, you know, being banned. I would say there has been a very consistent agenda to actually mainstream conversation around, you know, human and gay rights when you talk about that. And I think these particular film and other initiatives that have been there in the past, I think it's been part of that ongoing agenda. It's still a controversy, and by the way, if you open up the referendum question, it will still come back. So in a sense, I understand the moral issues we normally struggle with as a country when we say we are not yet there in terms of mainstreaming this and allowing this to be part of our daily life. But on the other hand, it's putting Kenya on the map in terms of we're being celebrated, the Kenya film industry at such a prestigious platform. So it's that balancing act. But it's the irony that it has been banned locally, but being celebrated globally.
Or maybe it should be a referendum question now.
It should be a referendum question.
I disagree.
All right. So thank you so much, Dr. Sam Kamau, who is a lecturer at the University of Aga Khan, as well as a political analyst, and Sandra Ochula, political analyst, just helping us mince up the dailies this morning. Make sure you grab your copy of The Standard. Details of the stories that we've just discussed here will be on that, so make sure you grab your copy of it. So this is Money Express. We're taking a quick break, but when we come back, Michael Gitonga has a perfect panel in order to jump into the conversation that we promised you earlier. And just allow me to remind you our Twitter poll questions. You can get active on social media. We're asking you this morning, what is your definition of a marginalized Kenyan? All right, so I'm just going to come right now on your screen. What is the definition of a marginalized Kenyan? We want to hear your thoughts. Make sure you tweet us at KTN News, at Zinza_K, and at Michael Gitonga. There it is. What is your definition of a marginalized Kenyan? We'd really love to hear your thoughts, because this is the basis of our conversation for the next 1 hour. Michael Gitonga, my co-anchor, will be hosting that conversation. This is Money Express. We're taking a quick break. We'll be right back.